its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
All right. Hey, everybody. How's it going out there? I'm Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff, and I am filling in for the Fenton Perspective. So I'm another host here at Revolution Radio, and I am also on Studio A. And I am trying to be a little bit more proactive with helping out my network so we don't have as much dead air. So I would have been here a lot sooner, but I had a class. I'm taking an online biodynamic class. Well, I'm taking a Rudolf Steiner course online, 8 weeks. Tonight was the second week. And, I have to read and all this other stuff and probably write a paper and, all that kind of good stuff. But studied biodynamics over 10 years ago, Steiner College, a lot of nutritional stuff as well. And, so I'm going back to the basics. Never read the agricultural lectures or anything like that. I just did hands-on BD. So now I'm get to go back and study some Steiner, some spiritual agriculture, and just all kinds of amazing, brilliant things. Anyway, so I am the host of Carrying Stones and Digging Holes radio show, filling in for this radio show for the last hour. You can also find me on Studio A, and you can scroll down on Studio A. I'm the bee with the flower. Click on the thumb link, and you can find out information about me and my show. So I was thinking about, I was asking the boys in the host chat and our manager what Fenton, her show was about. So I figured I'd just tell you some of my crazy dealings. I think you might find them interesting. Might be a good place to actually talk about them. So my mother and my father both came from very old bloodline lineages of people, that were prophets and shamanic type people. And so before I was born and before that they met and had me, then went on, about their lives. My mother was handled by, I don't know what you want to call him, the bad guys, the Illuminati, the evil, the twisted, the cabal. When my mom was 18 years old, she got handled. A wealthy young whippersnapper came into her life from the East Coast, and they got married, and his family never showed up. And, it was one of those kinds of stories. And my mom thought that she was riding off into the fairy princess sunset. I'm pretty sure. Probably what most women would think. Oh, wow, a well-educated guy, comes from a very good and prominent wealthy family, is good looking. Yeah, right in with the right horse. So my mom got swept off of her feet, and eventually he took my mom back to the East Coast. And as soon as that happened, she was, hold on a second. Okay. Anyway, as soon as that happened, the family, which I believe worked for the Illuminati, were handlers for sure, put my mom into a mental hospital where she was fried. She was given electroshock therapy, strapped to a board endlessly, was raped, all of the mental health facility highlights. And, my grandmother, see, back then it was difficult for people who were poor to actually travel. And my grandmother was very, close to all of us. And so my grandmother didn't even know this was going on until the mental health hospital calls her and says, well, we're releasing your daughter. And she's like, releasing her from where? And we need you to pick her up here on the East Coast. Well, they're poor. They're in California. There's no way it could happen. And I think my grandmother blamed herself her entire life for this situation. But by the time my mom, they could get up money together, they got her a bus ticket. She had to be on the bus alone after being tortured and mutilated and fried. And the person that got off the bus was not the same person that had left by, any means. So this was like, long before I came along. So my mother was very gifted, psychic, could grow things. She, even with fried green tomatoes, she could literally grow zucchini plants in sand that were taller than people. And the things that she could do with nature. She just had this really incredible, magical ability with soil and plants. Exceptional, magical ability. So, anyway, then my real dad, he came from, let's just say he had a lot of abilities. He comes from an old bloodline and was born in the United States. His mother was born in Russia. And he ended up going to school for parapsychology. So, the powers that be kind of always had an eye on him. And they spent most of his life and my life running and hiding from the government and certain agencies like NASA. Even having to, that's a whole other crazy story, but yeah. So my dad didn't get to see for years and years and years. And the last time I had seen him was when I was 18 and we had dinner and we had this pretty heavy spiritual dialogue about things. And then, he went into hiding and he was not available to grow me up because he was constantly, and I think on some level he felt it might be really safer for me, if he wasn't kind of around. So I didn't see him for 18 years. And in 2016, I get a call from Spokane, Washington. And mind you, 4 years before this, I even had, people like private investigator type people in tracking him down through the years. And we found that we, got to Spokane, but we couldn't actually find out where he was in Spokane. I even made a special trip up there. I piggybacked my trip with 10 days of ceremony with my last native teacher, Bavado. So it was a pretty intense time when I was looking for him. But I suspected, he'd either been murdered or, he probably drank himself to death or, whatever was happening. And so he was still hiding, still under the radar. But so I went to Spokane. I got a call, and it was the Spokane sheriff chaplain. And he said, hey, we tracked you down. Your dad never has been married, and you're his only kid. And you need to come up here. And I even think that the whole death setup, because it's really weird around the whole body thing. And I didn't see the body and just how crazy that whole thing went down. But first time that I'd heard anything about him in 18 years. So I went there and, tried to put all of his affairs in order and all of that and talk to different people. And I was kind of shocked at how everybody that I talked to that knew my dad, who, when he was alive, would say, wow, you look just like him, kind of irrefutable. So, but I even feel like his death setup was kind of a weird thing. And his caregiver was hysterical when I went to his apartment and had a meeting with the property manager and his caregiver, and she was hysterical. She kept saying that he shouldn't have died. There's no reason that he should have died. There's no reason that he should have died. But there was weird stuff. Like there was a birth certificate, a pretty modern one, that was on the kitchen counter. And when I asked, they said, well, it's because the cops, because the caregiver found him dead, until they know what he died from. It's kind of like they have to search through everything. And before I got there, and it just was really strange. Like he had no pictures. The property manager kind of befriended him, and she said that when he moved in there, he had like a small suitcase of stuff. Because I couldn't find any photos of myself, nothing from his mom. Was trying to maybe find other documents. Anyway, but even the caregiver said that he had binoculars and he would look out the windows and stuff with his binoculars and stuff like that. So I think a lot that he was still pretty paranoid, probably. I mean, he didn't do anything to be paranoid for, but, I think people trying to use you as a weapon can be a little bit life-altering. So I always tell people NASA is not a space agency. It's a human weapon agency because of my experience and experience of other people that I've known who've had anything to do with them. So then my parents met, and then they created me. The Big Bang inside of my mom's uterus happened, and spirit became matter. And so my dad was around a little bit for the first 11 months and then disappeared. And so I was raised by an amazing man who was in World War II and just a Renaissance and just an exceptionally good human being on all levels. And also taught me to be tough and how to box and shoot guns. He had John Wayne, guns on his hips all the time because Nevada, you could have a gun and have it loaded and do whatever you want with it. Wear it, have it on a hip hugger, on your friend's seat. And so he taught me a lot of life skills that I don't think I would have survived this life, if he hadn't really helped me with that. So he was a very honorable person. So, I would run into my dad a couple times through my life. But, he was pretty messed up. My mom was pretty messed up from the handling. NASA they were always trying to kidnap my dad because they wanted him to go to work for them, be like remote viewing extreme, like an extreme kind of remote viewer and, kill your ass kind of weapon. And so he was always hiding out from the potential kidnapping that started for him in the 60s. So it's interesting how, a lot of these conspiracies, people have facts that a lot of these conspiracies are spot on. So I grew up in, complete weirdness. I was a pretty weird kid myself growing up and being kind of the merging link between two old bloodlines, and then had my own star kid issues that started off hot and heavy out the gate. And I think it really drove my mom to drink because of the stress. I think that because of what happened to her in the mental hospital, she thought, anything that I did that stepped out of the normalcy box was going to be a reflection on her. It took me most of my life to figure this out, and that she was terrified of having to be thrown in someplace again. Like, this was everything that haunted her, terrified her, kind of a thing. And it's interesting how as a family we didn't talk about it, didn't even find out about it until 5 years after she died, when my grandmother, needed to come clean. That all kind of happened. So I was 19, and I had been partying, probably smarted. Here comes some Freudian stuff, just because this is honest. So I probably about 19, I had a 7-day complete and total catatonic nervous breakdown when I was 19. And I had been partying for a while. I did start smoking weed at 14. It was a coping mechanism for my family. No, for my life. Had to pretend to live this normal life when everything's so like not normal. And so when I was about 19, it all just kind of converged. It was kind of like this moment where, like two big tsunami waves collapsed together. Bam! And so I lived in a house, because I was an 80s child, right? I'm a haggard generation because that's how I deal with things. I deal with them in a very kind of a haggard way. I like to live off the land, and I have all those kinds of, take care of yourself, build yourself something, fight, don't just back down and give up kind of stuff. Because my grandfather owned a trucking company in Fresno. So, and everybody knew him, Chet Jones Trucking. So, grew up totally on the haggard end. So when I was 19, I was living at a place where, we literally had a band set up for the living room. That's pretty much what it is. And so my roommate, he played the drums. I was dating a guy who was a really good guitarist. And literally people would come over and rock and party. I mean, you'd have like 15 people there and they'd go around, playing the different instruments. I was kind of more of a socializer. And but anyway, we would have those kinds of events at our house. I wasn't heavy into drugs, but I was dabbling extensively during this period too. So I come to this breakdown when I'm 19, sitting catatonic, literally catatonic. Everybody that lived in the house, said that they couldn't even get through to me. But basically, I sat on the couch for 7 days straight, like, pretty much. And even though people would be in the house, like I wouldn't recognize anybody. I was in a pretty like meltdown. I was in major meltdown. So after about 7 days, the phone rings and they kind of, shake me up and they're like, it's your grandmother. So I come back and I'm like, oh yeah, I better talk to her. I guess they had told her kind of what the story was going on with me. And my grandmother just was really short. And she said, honey, basically, we don't really believe in these kind of people, but I think that you need one because you need somebody where you're at to help you. She said, you need to get a psychiatrist. So I ended up going to this place that had a psychiatrist that ran the whole thing. But there were like 4 psychologists that were working underneath him for, talk therapy. He was the drug therapist, obviously. And he was the one that when you came in, you had a session with him, and then, he would decide, what your treatment protocol or whatever was going to be. And so, and the address, it was 7777 Forest Street. That should have been like a major indication. Yeah, because that's quite a bit of 7 energy. Anyway, so I went into, I made an appointment a week later and went in to have a session and with the psychiatrist. And it was pretty weird because, when I think about it now, I think, the way he acted, he kind of like already kind of knew me or knew about me. And we talked about, that I needed to really get totally sober. It wasn't going to be like I didn't need drug treatment or anything like that, but I really kind of had to start focusing in on sobriety. And so we were talking about that. Then he wanted me to take a whole bunch of drugs. He wanted to give me an injection to start it all off. And I said, like the whole deal, I don't want to take drugs and I'm not going to do the psychiatric stuff. But, I think I need some like just average Joe therapy, to try to, talk through a lot of stuff. Anyway, I got this guy named Dave. I forget what his last name is, but he met a really tragic end. Was a super great guy. And I end up, after I started coming out of the catatonic states, when I'd go for therapy, and I was like coping. And he really was catalyst to kind of bringing me back. He had this huge, like square, thing on a easel that had pages of paper. And so he'd write things really big right in front of me and try to talk to me while I was in these sessions, because I just had broke so hard that it was really hard to get me kind of back in this body and kind of online. And I would take these pieces of paper, this large writing, and I would actually weekly, I would tape them on my walls so that I could see them from my bed, when I woke up or went to sleep, start working on kind of some of these tools. So in the course of like 6 months, we got to know each other pretty good. And there was a point where I had a lot different kind of abilities when I was younger than I do now. But back in those days, I had this ability where I could move like the door a little bit. Like I couldn't slam it shut, by focusing in on it. I couldn't do any of that. It would move just a little bit. It wasn't like, Exorcist or anything like that. And the other ability that was really prominent was that I couldn't really touch a lot of people. So I'm not a really big touchy, huggy person, because I could just drain things dry. And then late during that time frame too, I also had this weird stuff with electronics, like things would explode or blow up or catch on fire or just completely stop working. So in my whole life, I was always like really cautious about kind of how I use this energy. And so when I was talking to him one time, he said, I want you to try that thing on me. I said, what thing? He said, the one where you can like drain energy out of things. He goes, I want to just check that out. And I said, all right. I said, after the session, then I'll totally drain you. That'll be good for me. I'll have some more, energy in my energy field. So at the end of the session we had, I said, okay, are you ready? And he said, yes. I just put my hand on him. It took 2 seconds. And then he literally was laying down on his desk, and I left and I shut his door. And so we had a couple more sessions after that. And he said, one of the things he said was that he said, drain me. He said, you nearly he said, I couldn't even get off my desk for 3 hours. And I said, I know. That's why I don't touch people much. or I don't let them touch me, So anyway, he felt that I was pretty good to go after, I don't know how long, 7 or 8 months or something, 6, 7, 8 months, 9 months of therapy. And I was pretty good. He really, really, really helped me. And so, he said, well, now just call me, you're released from whatever. And so just call me whenever you need help. And I said, great, thanks. So I didn't really talk to him again for about 30 days. And later on, I found out that this is therapists are not allowed to call their patients after therapy's done unless the person, it's kind of a conflict of interest. It's not professional by their standards. So I get a call from him about 30 days later, and he said, hey, now that you're not a patient, do you think you'd like to come for dinner? It'd be me and my wife and and if you want to bring somebody. And he goes, and I have a friend of mine that's going to be in town from NASA. He works at NASA with his wife. And he said, the guy's kind of interested in some of the things that you could do. And I was young. I was 19. I was like, if anybody could help me to understand what's going on with me, like I'm hip. I'm hip. I didn't really think about, I really had a lot of naivety. I didn't really, because I don't think I understood how dark this place really was. Or what the potential of that kind of darkness is manifested in this reality. So I said, well, let me see if I can get a hold of my friend, because I don't really have a car right now and I need a ride, and I'll just see if, he wants to go. So I called up a friend of mine that, one of my kind of male friends that knew that I was a fruitcake. I mean, that's what I used to get called by a couple of my friends. Hey, fruitcake. So I called him and I said, so this is the deal with the therapist and this NASA thing and these people. And I remember there's this really long pause. And then I hear this really long sigh. And he goes, are you effing crazy? He's like, do you want those people to like kidnap your ass? And then what? Then what happens then? And I was like, wow, you're right. I can't really go there. I mean, kind of dumb on me for even thinking that I would go to, to dinner. So anyway, I called him and he said, okay, well, we tried, blah, 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 blah. And I call it the first, potential kidnapping of NASA, and how they were, kind of moving in for the approach. But they're constantly monitoring me. I mean, they have extraterrestrial, well, they have these things that are, and I've seen them, a woman from the Pentagon had one that came to visit me about 3 years back, I think. But had this kind of multi-dimensional window thing, right? And it's hard. It's not easy. It's not an easy thing to see, like how it is. I don't know how they do it, but they have beings who are thousands of years old that communicate from where their body is through these holographic energy thingies that they can, I don't know exactly how it's done, but you can see them like real time on like this weird windowy, it looks like frozen, like if it had frozen glass, because the being looks pretty fuzzy and it looks like kind of non-clear glass. It's kind of a weird thing. It floats, but it's kind of multi-dimensional, right? There's not a real physical thing about it. But they have beings, that are constantly looking through those kinds of windows, at us. I mean, there's no way that you can in this day and age actually hide from any of it. They constantly know where you're at. But I'm pretty sure that I'm monitored, not as much as I used to be, just because of, everything out in the media is so far out there that they probably think nobody will really listen to me anyway. So it's not really a big deal. She's so far. They'll think she's so far gone. She need a white jacket. So yeah. So that was like kind of my first deal with realizing, the whole NASA thing. And so what happened after that was that, I don't know, it was like about 10 years later, and I was seeing this other therapist, which was a trippy therapist too, and she did some weird stuff. I mean, I was colleagues with her. We worked in a group to handle patients. I do the structural and energetic medicine, acupuncture, all that kind of stuff, nutritional stuff. And then they did, like the therapy stuff. But I started out with her, and she actually was a therapist to people that were walk-ins, kind of a thing. So I got to meet a few walk-ins. so I have my whole other, theory and experience about walk-ins. Mostly what you read on the internet is like not fact. It's not what walk-ins are. Walk-ins are not, they're not a soul. They're usually a light or like a light ray, a ray of light. And that they will sometimes periodically occupy bodies to get work done here. And so they're not people, they're not souls. So it's not a soul-y thing. And I'd be very beware out there if you feel like you're a walk-in or have a walk-in that was a soul, it's probably a little closer to possession, just so you know. Anyway, so I don't know, 10 years later, I found out that my first therapist that helped me through that really hard time, that approached me for NASA, that he had committed suicide almost around the time, I believe. It all kind of coincides with about the time where, I said no to the dinner party. It wasn't long after that he was found, they said that he committed suicide, but he hung himself and slit his wrists. So pretty sure it wasn't suicide. And the building 7777 Forest Street burned down to the ground at the same time. So not a coincidence, but yeah, so I found that out like around 10 years later from the new therapist I was going to, who did therapy on walk-ins. It's so funny because you know what? It's like you just can't make this stuff up. And I know, now I think that I'm getting older. I realize like how crazy, sometimes some of this sounds, but I'm also kind of a conservative in the weirdness, because a lot of people think that they're having certain types of, experiences, and their experiences are so, collective, but also completely different than, the kind of experiences I have or have had. And so sometimes it's like, I know a lot of things about a lot of things. I've been through a lot of stuff. And at this point, I have the discernment to tell if people are lying or they have like a Fibonacci story, a Fibby story, because of what I've experienced, and now I'm not an expert. Things are way farther crazier and out there than I've probably been. But yeah, it's pretty crazy stuff. So let's see. You know what? Since it's a UFO show, I might as well just tell people about. I have visitation from my star family, and periodically, and so I've been in contact and near lots of different kinds of extraterrestrials. So I'll just tell you about the last big extraterrestrial event I had, which still is kind of a shaker for me. It still has I have a nervous system twitch from it still. But so I've been pretty much living in my van for quite a while. Been pretty much living out of my car since 2006. Lots of different events have happened. And it all is what it is. You make the best of it and you keep on going. And more than ever, I'm growing and thriving probably more than, I ever would have if I would have stayed, kind of on the path that I was on. I had brain cancer, so that really threw me off entirely on a totally different path as well. So I was sleeping, I was helping a friend of mine. His wife had died and they had an apartment. And so I was there. I was going over there. There was a huge parking lot. And so the apartment people didn't have any problem with me like sleeping in my van because they knew I was helping him. And they didn't really mind however long, that I was going to stay, just try to help straighten it all out. So I'm sleeping in my van, and the way that my van's parked in this parking lot, there's like this big woodland area. So my window is looking out through this kind of woodland area. It's winter, it's kind of coming on to winter. All the leaves on the trees are gone. And I remember laying on my bed and just having like the weirdest feeling. It was like about 5 a.m. and kind of, where it's like daylight, it's all pinky out, like the light is starting to come out. And I remember looking out my front window and I remember seeing this. I thought it was a person standing there in the woods, in the woodland, but I could see it really well. And it was really interesting because it had this, it did later on, the story is like, I realized it did everything it could to keep my mind from shocking out or getting emotional, because of this interaction that this thing is looking at me through my window. And, I potentially could think it's like an axe murderer or something, why is it out there? And so it kept doing all these different things to help my mind, because it was a super extremely higher evolved being, really high. And so my body was having some reaction, my mind was having some reaction to this interaction. And so it kept throwing up things to try to calm me and soothe me and just keep me calm. And it had like, I have this thing about beautiful wool, like hand woven, like wool. I mean, there's, there was that one movie that they had like the most beautiful costumes. And it was all in wool. It was like a movie in the 90s. But I have this thing about wool and interwoven beautiful wool, really high-end wool stuff. And so it was wearing this like wool cape, like 1800s, they had those outside coat capes. And he had this hat, very, Scottish looking type hat, but they were like interwoven of this wool. And so the being was like distracting me with this wool, coat and this hat. And I'm thinking the whole time, like, where in the hell did he get those? Like, those are probably pretty expensive. Look how beautiful that hand. So the whole time, like, he's keeping me busy while he's standing there, so that I can like pay attention to like some other stuff. And I remember at one point I finally like looked up at his face. And it was kind of like my body all of a sudden decided to shake, just because it was something that I'd never seen before and I hadn't been in contact with before. And so your body is like an animal and it will freak out sometimes. I've had it freak out a lot over things that have happened, like literally go into convulsions. And I'm like, okay, I wonder how long this is going to take, like, to get through it because of some kind of stress or shock. But anyway, so I noticed that the face, even though I could only see part of the face, the cape was kind of covering the nose area, one of the ears, and then the hat kind of covered the top, and then the cape covered the whole bottom part. But I realized, I started looking at his eyes, and I'm like, man, those eyes, those are like bird eyes. Because in my past, I've had birds. And then I was like, the coloring of that face, it's not skin, it's what is that? And it reminded me of those little kind of the white color on the cockatoos. It has like a gray to the white. So I started noticing that it probably wasn't skin. It didn't look like fur, and I was having to admit that it might look a little feathery. And then I looked on the other side of it where the ear was exposed from the hat and the cape, and there was a bird hole, bird ear hole. And then mostly just kind of this white feathering that had this gray tinge. So there was this moment where the hat disappears, the cape disappears, and then he's just this floating kind of bird face, not fully exposed, floating. And I'm thinking to myself, holy shit, this is pretty, extreme. Like, this is like a humanoid bird hybrid. And maybe they say it the other way, like a bird human, or a human birdanoid. Maybe that's what they would call it. I don't know. But after then his face disappeared, and then I was pretty calm considering. My body's a little stressed out, but it was like it went on for a really long time. I'd say like at least 15 minutes. 5 o'clock it started, and 5:15 it was over. But then I was like, okay, I'm up. I'm not going back to sleep. I'm going to go get a coffee, drive over, get, Starbucks coffee or whatever. And on my way to get the Starbucks coffee, like it all hit me. Like everything that was kind of being repressed, the stress of the event, the kind of being it was, how my body felt about that being, not too happy as a, like my body's going to react to it as a predator, right? Because it's a bird humanoid that's bigger than I am. And so, just a lot of different kinds of things, like my body just kind of started convulsing or whatever else. And then my mind kind of broke loose, and I was like, oh my God, I think it was a human bird. And oh my God, I wonder if it was going to tell me anything. And I was like, oh my God. And then I just had to get out of the van and throw up, because the event was that intense, because the energy of this being was so intense. And I really think it tried everything it possibly could to minimize the impact. But it was such an intense energy, even for somebody like me. It kind of rocked me. It rocked me for quite a while. And so people will say things to me like, oh, was it the blue avians? I'm like, no, this thing isn't even close to like the blue avians. It wasn't blue. It actually had a physical hard presence, as well as, being able to blip in and out. And it wasn't like a blue avian at all, kind of experience. But I do believe, there's a good book, kind of an interesting book that's out there. And I forget, Unimus, Robert Stanley. I think that's his website, Unimus. I think he used to have like a UFO something magazine or something like that, or paranormal. Anyway, he still has a website, but he has a free PDF, and it's called The Return of the Bird Clans. Bird clans being native tribes. That's the family. The clan is the family. So, and so I think that to a great degree that there were extraterrestrials that looked like everything possible, and that they would come and live with different tribes, like native people that come from the bird clans, and that they would learn ceremonies, they would learn things, about birds, and they learn all the activations and the tools, which are the medicines and the technologies and all of that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of like, my kind of feeling on it. So I think that they know a lot more about, a lot of the extraterrestrials that were, bird or human bird or bird humanoid or whatever, human birdanoid kind of a thing. But I think that there are lots of different ones. There was a lady too, like Helen Downs, and I found out about her from her last lecture. I think she was up at the top of Montana. What's up there? There's like a wealthy community up there that's highly spiritual, and there are a lot of people that go up there, and I forget what the name of it is. But she did a slideshow on all of the photos of the extraterrestrials, and she mostly, they would reflect in all kinds of different stuff. So they would show themselves actually in reflections. And so she had like years and years and years of taking photos and collecting. And mostly she had, I think the extraterrestrials that used to come to her a lot, there were two types, but I remember one for sure was, they call it like the lions, you know what I mean? They represent kind of the lions. They sort of have that kind of a look to them. But she was pretty interesting. I looked at some of her photos. I think it was Helen Downs. Anyway, I always try to email her. I still have her on my email list from 15 years ago, 16 years ago. And so I'm always asking her to come on my show. But when she retired, she like totally retired from even talking about her experiences and just any of it. She just completely 100%. That was it. But it was really interesting to see these humany like lion, beings and windows and still puddles of water and all kinds of crazy stuff that would have glass, windows. I think that even there was some objects like glass objects and but pretty interesting. Water, reflections in water. But that's kind of like how they came to her, and that she was allowed to actually take photos of them so that she could kind of show people. And this is the deal. People say, well, those photos could have been blah 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, well, they could have. But people that don't want to believe, they just don't want to believe, and that's okay. That's okay. That is okay. So words of wisdom. I've got less than 10 minutes. So I had a teacher when I was 23 years old. It was on a haphazard trip. Guess what? To Spokane. I had a friend of mine who was living up there when I was 23. And I decided I was really tired of living in Reno. I had a friend that had traveled around the world and said that, if I don't leave my small town, I'm always going to be have a small town mind, and it's good to travel and expand yourself. And is it going to be scary? Yeah. Is it going to be hard? Yeah. Because you're not going to have anybody to rely on. But you should do it. So anyway, I had a friend of mine who was living up there, mostly on the Coeur d'Alene area border. And so I decided to move. And my friend that was world traveled actually helped me move everything. And it was a difficult period. But the big thing that I met was that when I was 23, I was hooked up with a Lakota Sioux medicine woman who, in her youth, had been kidnapped by NASA, and she had to flee for her life at some point to get free of them. And she was healing people, had extraordinarily talented. And so she was my teacher for about a year, and she taught me energetic medicine. We're talking heavy duty type energetic medicine where you reach into people's bodies, you pull out the tumor, they go to the doctor the next day and no cancer, right? Things like that without touching the body. She's a lot more gifted at it than I was, but it's developed into my own type of work. But she used to say, there are three kinds of people. There are the atheists, which we should all worship because they're the backbone of our society, and everything runs because of them. And they don't know what's going to happen to when they die. They think this is it, and so they do their best. And they're the ones that, do the 25-year jobs and do all these jobs and stay the course. Because there is no expectation. They don't really believe in anything else but the now, the here and now, and being good people. Well, some of them are a little aggravating, but the second group of people, she said, were the dangerous group, and because we're talking from a shamanism perspective. And the middle group were people that had the languaging of seeming like the languaging and the vocabulary of seeming to be awake, enlightened beings. But they're not. They just have the vocabulary. And you get sucked in, to their storylines and whatever else that they're portraying because they've learned the language, but they haven't taken all of it internal. The third group is the group that, takes it internal, who I guess you could say talks their walk and walks their talk. And yes, I believe that I'm in that group. And I had to go through, I think, all three parts of those categories of people. And I have been led astray quite a bit by people who have a don't really have a knowledge base, but have a language and vocabulary that, the third category uses. So I have been pulled into the second category a lot, but I found in my life that those are pretty true. Like, I can basically put an individual in one of those three categories. And so really, I try to be careful about the second group, a lot of the budding spiritual people. And I wish you all the best, 100%. But it's the knowledge that you want. It's the knowledge and the information that you want. And that's the important path to take. Okay, so we have a few minutes left. Anyway, so I'm filling in for the last hour of Fenton Perspective. And so I tried to, bring you some good UFO and NASA stories and government stories. My own personal experience. I'm a factualist, not a conspiracist, because I've actually lived the conspiracies. I think that makes me a factualist at this point. And I've been your host for like the last hour, Carrying Stones and Digging Holes radio show. You can find me on Studio A, 3 p.m. 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturday, and on my Wednesday edition is noon Eastern Standard Time. And thank you for listening to me blab on and try to fill in some dead air. And I guess I got to get you guys worked up. I should have played some music because Am is up next, he said. So I'm supposed to like liven you up and wake you up out there. So turn on some disco or some ABBA or some rap or, whatever you need to get your booty shaken. Get up, get that snack, get that cold drink, get whatever you need to, and get ready for Am, our new head manager of the crazy flock of chickens. He's like the rooster looking out for us all, moving us forward. Like you see those little, when you have a farm and the man chickens and man turkeys do it too. And they're always trying to move their Chiquita bananas, their girls along. And so they run around trying to like herd them. But those crazy lady chickens, we're not very good at being herded, are we? We're probably not very good at taking hints as well either. Anyway, so our head rooster is coming on next. All right, so I have no idea how she signs out or how she goes out of her show. And anyway, check me out. I don't have as crazy things to talk about, probably as she does. But anyway, you got a couple crazy stories in there for now. All right, everybody. This has been Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff and the Fenton Perspective. And I'm the host on Saturdays and Wednesdays, Studio A of Carrying Stones and Digging Holes radio show. And that's it. Oh, hey, and I'm going to be on another host show on Wednesday morning, 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in Studio A, I believe, in Kelsey's Suite and Cultivating Consciousness. So I'm going to be on her show this Wednesday before I do my show on Wednesday. So yeah, check into Kelsey. Kelsey's my girl, and we work it together. No. All right, everybody, have a great night. Fenton Perspective, and this is what night? Monday edition. Over and out.